and welcome to the Hobo CEO podcast, where we're talking all things business and entrepreneurship, including the highs and lows, with a sprinkle of neurodiversity for good measure. I'm your host, Shay Wassell, neurodivergent serial entrepreneur, personal and business coach, author, researcher, and most importantly, a mother to one beautiful little human being. This podcast is all about sharing the entrepreneurial journey, as well as tips, tricks, and advice from my guests to help you become the business owner and entrepreneur you've always imagined you could be. And you definitely can be that person. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the beautiful lands on which I live and work, the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and to all First Nations people that are listening today. So let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hobo CEO podcast. I'm here tonight talking to Nigel about dyslexia and entrepreneurship. And for those who haven't listened to our podcast on the Dear Dyslexic podcast show, which Nigel and I spoke about his journey of dyslexia. And so today we wanted to talk about how dyslexia plays a role in entrepreneurship, because there is a lot of research coming out that around, and I don't know if this is correct in the UK, but around 40% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic or neurodivergent. So Nigel and I are going to unpack this. So welcome to the show, Nigel.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here. Very excited to talk about something I am passionate about.
Well, I would call myself a social entrepreneur, which seems to be kind of a newer term, would you say, that's come about recently. Where would you position yourself?
Well, I think I'm a real hybrid. So I'm an entrepreneur who turned academic. So I've really had at least two careers. So one as an entrepreneur, running a startup right through to exit, and also building a second career in my early 40s, getting a PhD and becoming adventure professor at three of the UK's leading universities, with a speciality of sorting problems out. And now I find myself working part-time, supporting other people who are entrepreneurs, but also getting involved in complex challenges like the National Health Service in the UK. So multiple careers, very difficult for me to find myself. What I would say is that all of those threads come together in this conversation we're having, because they aren't separate things. They're all intertwined. And because I am a dyslexic, I have got dyslexia, then I would say, of course, I'm a dyslexic entrepreneur, I'm a dyslexic academic, I'm a dyslexic leader, because dyslexia is part of who I am. So I think our conversation might bring those threads all together.
So how did you, it's an interesting journey becoming an entrepreneur and then becoming an academic, which I shouldn't say, but it reflects actually my story in a roundabout way too. So maybe it's not uncommon to be, but how did you get into the entrepreneurial space to begin with? Because it's hard.
Yeah. So maybe I know this is a typical story because I've now worked with many entrepreneurs. And so when I became an academic, I ended up working on programs to help entrepreneurs become more successful. So I know this is a similar pattern, but my story is that I was in a job a year out of graduating from university. I was an administrator and there was a problem in my organization. And I thought somebody needs to fix that. And when I looked around, it was obvious that nobody was going to do that. So I said to my brother, my younger brother, Tim, let's set up a business in order to solve this problem. I would now say in order to exploit this opportunity. And that's what we did. So it was just Tim and I to start with. And over the course of 8 years, we grew that company from 0 to 100 staff, did a joint venture, and we then exited. And then 4 years later, we did it all again. But this time I was in academia and he was running the company. So I had a slightly different role, but that entrepreneurial behavior, that entrepreneurial mindset, we learnt it and used it by setting up our own startups.
This is going to be completely a side note, but I was just thinking as you're talking about how your second one was around you're in academia and your brother was not.
Yeah.
But it was making me think, is it partly the R&D, so the research and development and testing that entrepreneurship can do, where we can bring the academia kind of into our work, which is real sidebar to what we're talking about. But I was just thinking.
I don't know, Shay. I'd need to think about that. I think my own experience is my entrepreneurial mindset was more powerful in a university environment. I could use that mindset that I had crafted in business, you might say, in a highly complex organization. But I think the reason I could do that was because I'm also dyslexic. So am I an entrepreneur because I'm dyslexic? I don't know. But as you said, there are more entrepreneurs who are dyslexic than there are dyslexic in the general population. So we think there's 1 in 10 people with dyslexia of what we could call dyslexia in the population. Probably 3 or 4 in 10 entrepreneurs have dyslexia in some form. So they're overrepresented. Well, I could be a really good example of that overrepresentation. They're underrepresented in university leadership. So
What do you think the reason, and I mean, the R&D, I think, is because in Australia, there's a lot around research and development and linking it with new technology and things like that, which is what I was thinking. But bringing it back to dyslexic and entrepreneurship, why do you think that is? Is it because we don't want to conform, or we struggle to conform to the 9 to 5, which is that's one of the reasons why I don't want to work in mainstream, is because I struggle with the 9 to 5 concept.
That's interesting, isn't it? I think you're certainly, as an entrepreneur, social or for profit, you are better able to control your work environment and adapt it to how you work best. You may be doing that subconsciously or consciously. As you get further down your career, like you and I are, then I'm obviously further. We are doing it more consciously now. In the early days, it was subconscious, I think. But I would say that there's another factor we shouldn't miss. So one is, yes, it provides us with that flexibility to adapt the environment to suit our cognitive preference, our learning style, our working style. But I think dyslexia, the characteristics of dyslexia can enhance the entrepreneurial mindset, the development of an entrepreneurial mindset. And I think that's why our dyslexics are overrepresented as entrepreneurs, partly because they can control their environment better, but also because their dyslexia gives them enhanced capabilities.
And so when you say enhanced capabilities, do you mean the problem-solving skills and the creativity or the appetite for risk?
I think it's probably all those things. I would describe it as the ability to hold complex ideas in your head at one time is very useful in highly complex dynamic environments, which is business. I think also the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, we would call that empathy. But in a commercial environment, what you're doing is you're anticipating your customer's needs, which means that you can adapt your offer, your product, your service to meet your customer's needs more finely than your competitors, and you can do it more quickly. I think it often means you are better with people generally. So it means that you tend to recruit and gain loyalty from your staff. So that means organizationally, you've got a stronger organization that's quicker to adapt. It's more in tune with customer needs. It's able to work in very complex environments. I think those skills are really important for entrepreneurship. And you mentioned it already. In order to survive, dyslexic have to be resilient. We've got through school and we're still here. We've survived school. I mean, that's one sentence which we could unpick for hours. And that means that you've got grit, determination, resilience, and that also can help you get through those difficult times. What I would say is that that's all well and good. Often it happens subconsciously. I think it becomes a real advantage or superpower when you start to be aware of it, because that allows you to use your big picture thinking to include yourself. and the environment and the organization you create. And we may want to talk about that as well, but I think that's really important.
I'm going on a bit of a tangent here as you were talking. I was thinking about Steve Jobs and how he created the iPhone. Do you think some of those aspects he created to help himself, like Siri and Google Maps, because we get lost easily? Like, I was thinking part of our entrepreneurship is creating products or environments that help us as well.
Yeah. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, which means I've had to study entrepreneurship. And what I would say is that I notice there's a particular pattern I notice in entrepreneurial mindset. And one of it is around idea generation. And entrepreneurs might say to you, the thing is, I have 100 ideas before breakfast. So what they are very good at is generating new ideas. They're also very good at recognizing of the 10 good ideas, which is the one they should focus on. So they're what I would call that opportunity recognition. So idea generation, opportunity recognition. And the other thing they're very good at is exploiting opportunities through enterprises, whether a social enterprise, a for-profit enterprise, a university department, a government department, a hospital. They get good at, so they're good at generating ideas, good at recognizing what really is the one they should focus on, and really good at gathering around the resources, people and money and buildings and systems they need to exploit those opportunities. And in all of those cases, I think dyslexia can be an enhancement to those capabilities. But the really big thing that I think is very interesting is when you start to think about entrepreneurship, not as a single person, but as a team. And that's when I think we could talk about that, I'm sure, in a lot more detail, but I think that's when it gets really interesting.
For me, the only way I've been able to get to where I am today is by bringing people along to support the journey and the cause. And that's why I started with the charity, Dear Dyslexic, because I knew that the problem was greater than me and I needed multiple people to be able to help create a tribe. Yeah. And so that's always been kind of the core of what I've done, is to bring people in or along that could help fill the gaps or enable me to create the concept or the idea and then let me implement it, but have the people around to support how we implemented it.
And what you're doing is you're exhibiting this conscious decision. You're aware of it now. You can see the pattern, and that means you can do it more quickly. You can accelerate this. So Tim and I, it took us 8 years to build our first business to that big turnover of employees. It took us half that time the second time we did it. And that's because we'd been through that experience. I think we could do it even more quickly because we'd start having the conversations around, well, let's think about this in terms of cognition, which we never would have said when we set up our first business. But that's your language. And the other thing I think you're doing as well is that you're going beyond the boundary of your organization. So you're not thinking, this is my boundary. You're saying, there's the opportunity. Who do I need to gather around in order to deal with that challenge, that opportunity, that disaster? So again, it's much more of a collaboration than people who don't have this preference would think about.
And it's interesting you say the second time around was faster because the first time for me was the charity, which is in hibernation at the moment until we turn it into our research centre. And, in 7 odd years, we've hardly generated any funds. So people might say, what are you doing? Why have you stuck at this? Because you made no money. And I still work in a day job. But in the last 8 months, I've made more money than I ever did in 7 years with the charity. And I don't know whether it's partly the language now is around neurodivergence. We're able to have these conversations about workplaces and the power of bringing neurodivergence in. So I feel like it's like the right point in time, but also the learnings of what hasn't worked to help it to create the charity that I hope for, and how we can leverage those learnings into the social enterprise. And we're seeing it rapidly start to grow.
Yes. I think what I would say, it's all about timing.
At Rethink Dyslexia, we are doing things differently. As a global leader in creating inclusive environments for adults with dyslexia, Our commitment is to provide individuals with opportunities to live healthier, happier, and more connected lives. Through our range of tailored services, including coaching, learning and development programs, consultancy, and training, we're helping dyslexic individuals, businesses, and organisations to better understand and support their dyslexic employees. So if you're looking for insights, inspiration, and expert advice on dyslexia and how you can provide inclusive practices and environments, then head to rethinkdyslexia.com to find out more or book your free consultation today.
So one can have a really interesting idea that's very revolutionary and dynamic. If I think of, you mentioned Steve Jobs, if you think about Apple developed the Neutron, which was a particular digital assistant, and it failed. If you think about Bill Gates, and they developed the tablet PC a decade before the iPad, and it effectively failed. So having good ideas is one thing. Knowing the appropriate time to take them to market is another. And because you have got dyslexia, you've got that enhanced ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. So you are thinking about what your customer needs, and you're getting better and better at that, which means you're aligning your product to your customer more quickly. And that becomes a self-perpetuating process. And maybe it's taken you a while to really understand what those customers are and what they need. But now you've got that skill, you can do it more quickly and repeat that, I would suggest.
Well, yes, we're seeing it. Yeah, I think it isn't partly in the timing. But I also feel like the 6 or 7 years of building the foundation gave us the reputation and the brand to leverage this next phase, which I think has been really important. But I don't know, do you feel sometimes when I talk to dyslexics and we can't let go of something?
Well, that's the grit and determination, isn't it? And I would say that I've had more failed ideas than successful ideas. So maybe I've also learned to let go of things that don't work. And it's very hard. I mean, I've got numerous examples in my own, when I ran my own company, where I'd think something was a really great idea, but the customer didn't. Well, you either carry on doing that thing the customer doesn't value, adding cost, or you think, oh, maybe I'm wrong here, maybe I'll do things differently. And bear in mind that if you're dyslexic at school, you've been told this, that you're wrong, or you're lazy, or you're stupid, or you're thick. So you are probably predetermined to question your own, oh, am I right? Well, maybe I'm not right, because, I'm used to that conclusion. So maybe dyslexics find it easier to let go of things that don't work.
Do you think a positive mindset, like what have you learned from studying entrepreneurship? Because if you look at like all the stuff on social media, which is a lot of noise for businesses, I think, like some mornings I look at the reels on LinkedIn and think, oh my God, I'm never going to be successful. Look at all these neurodivergent, fabulous people that look like they're making lots and lots of money. So partly it's cutting out the noise. But I now lost my train of thought because I got caught up with LinkedIn scrolling in the mornings. Let me see. I'll come back to it. It was about the positive mindset. Sorry, it took me a second. Do you think that has, like sometimes I say, go to bed and I'm going to be successful. I'm going to be successful. And trying to say, yes, next year I'm going to make that $500,000 and I'm going to positively.
I know what you mean, Shay. Yeah, I do know what you mean. I think I would just reframe that thought around failure. So I would suggest that typically dyslexic have not succeeded well at school. So if you're at school for 12 years, before you might even be longer if you carry on. And in those environments, it's very easy to pick up the idea that you have failed. You haven't done as well as your peers at this test, this exam, this qualification. So you are used to failure. And I don't mean this is a positive thing, but in order for you to get through your school, you've had to pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and get back in the game. So you've had to adapt to failure, and that means that you've got a higher level of resilience. You're more positive about the day than you're someone else. And I would describe myself in all the work environments I've been in. Of course, you can get to a point where it's just overwhelming. But most of the time, I would wake up thinking, today is going to be a better day than yesterday. That was the default. Of course, there could be a huge body of evidence which says, no, today's going to be awful, but don't worry because tomorrow's going to be better.
So do you think having a positive mindset is really important in an entrepreneur space? Because there are a lot of ups and downs, like the waves are pretty big.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Well, I would say that it can feel like there are more downs than up as an entrepreneur, and it's the ability to keep going through those. Yeah, I think that positive mindset is probably good in all environments, but particularly in entrepreneurship where, the market's going to tell you whether you are successful, not your own opinion. That means that, sometimes you are going to get it wrong. Well, you learn from that, you adapt and you go back. And I would say that entrepreneurship is an iterative process. This entrepreneurial mindset isn't something you do once. What happens is you're doing it all the time.
So do you think that your dyslexia ever tripped you up in entrepreneurship? I don't need, you're laughing, so I don't need to elaborate on what I mean by that.
It would trip me up all the time. I'll give you a humorous example, then something more serious. I had a bank manager called Brian, and after 3 years, he said to me, Nigel, when you send me your cash flow forecast and accounts, would you not say in your letter, dear brain, because to me, and I blame the computer, but really, so I think my dyslexia has tripped me up. What I would say though, is that as I became more aware of the advantages of it, it trips me up far less. So self-awareness actually allows you to perform better because you are aware of the possibility you might be wrong and the possibility you might need someone else's advice, which lends you to more collaborative work.
Do you feel that it's important, regardless of being dyslexic or not, in the entrepreneur space, that you have a mentor or someone that can question your ideas and encourage you to test the market and to think differently to how you're thinking?
I mean, I would say yes to that, both from my own experience of having good mentors. Maybe they weren't always official mentors, someone to talk to, but also having mentored. Well, I've mentored people in work who are neurodiverse. That's an interesting story in itself. But I've also mentored lots of entrepreneurs. And in those conversations with entrepreneurs, what we're doing is we're talking strategically most of the time. Yes, we might drop operationally, but the point of those sessions is to keep the conversation strategic. And I can do that because I'm thinking big at the same time as, so maybe it makes me a better mentor, but certainly I would say the entrepreneurs I work with, it does help them to be thinking strategically, which what I would reflect on is it's very difficult when you're an entrepreneur to think strategically because you're dealing with the day-to-day hard work of getting through to get that order, to get the cash in, to deal with that issue, to focus on that bottleneck. So having somebody who says, just a minute, let's just go back to what you were saying about your strategic vision. What's your exit strategy? Tell me about why you think that's a good thing to spend time and a resource on. It is actually quite a useful thing to have.
Yes, I think I've always tried to have a mentor, I always talk about having a psychologist as well to support or a counselor to. In my first book, The Hobo CEO, I had a chapter on the mentor, the coach, and the shrink, and what was the difference between the three, and why they were all important in my life. Because we do carry a lot of baggage and trauma. How do you switch off? Because as an entrepreneur, until my eyes close heavily, and as soon as my eyes big open, that's it. My brain does not stop, constantly running.
Well, that is a big, big issue. And I would say that as an entrepreneur, it's extremely hard to switch off. I found that I couldn't walk my dog. I couldn't eat a meal. I couldn't do things that would be normal behavior without thinking about in the back of my mind. And people around would notice that behavior. So I think you've got to really own that and work hard at finding out what it is that helps you to unwind a bit. And some people find that through physical exercise. That's a good thing. I like to walk. And the rhythm of walking helps me to process. So by the end of the walk, I process a lot of stuff, but I've also got exercise. I'm healthier. The big thing that I'm learning now is creativity, artistic creativity is really powerful in terms of being absorbed in something that is not about work, not about an organization challenge, but creating a piece of pottery, drawing something, painting something. For me, I find that very good. But people have got to find their own way of almost detoxing from that entrepreneurial mindset. How do you switch it off? And I think it's a combination of, I think creativity and physical interaction can be very good.
I feel like the busier the business is getting, the less and less I'm able to do anything but be all consumed.
Yeah. And that's where I think understanding your preference and saying to yourself, having that hard conversation with yourself to say, just a minute, come on, it's in your interest to spend that hour doing this other thing because it'll refresh you. You can engage with other people and it means that you will be fresher when you deal with that problem. You know, a problem isn't always solved by putting more and more effort in. We know that as dyslexics, sometimes it's about stepping back and looking bigger in order to solve a problem. So it's in your interest, your organization's interest, for you to develop your own strategy at doing that.
I think it's hard because I love it so much. So I'm trying to, like with the charity turning into a research center, but that's still work.
Yeah,
but I love it. So it's like, okay, I'll separate from the business to look at the research center. But then it's all still work.
Yes. And maybe it's about developing healthy boundaries between some of these things to enable you to create space for more personal.
Yes. No looking at LinkedIn. So that's how I meet wonderful people and we can connect with people all around the world. Are there some key learnings that you'd like to pass on to our listeners from either a dyslexic entrepreneur's perspective or what you've learned generally in entrepreneurship that might be helpful for those that are in the waves?
Yeah. I would think two things spring to mind. One is to recognize that this is a cycle. So the entrepreneurial mindset runs through this cycle all the time. So we said about running the second business, building it twice as quickly, but everything that you're doing as an entrepreneur, you become more systemized, more conscious, and means you can do this more quickly. So I would say more is better because you're able to learn and you can get better and better at this. The other important thing I would just share is the work of Helen Taylor, who's at Cambridge. And what she's been doing is looking at the way in which cognitive divergence is actually part of the reason why the human species is successful. So what her argument is that we have developed as a species to work in groups. And in those groups, we do better where we have divergent thinking, whether that's fine detail thinkers, you might say more exploitation, or you've got people who are big picture thinkers, let's call it exploratory. So what you've then got is a spectrum of people, some who are biased towards exploitation and some who are biased towards exploration. When you can work together, that means the human species is more successful. And that means it's really important to develop mechanisms to collaborate. To cooperate and collaborate becomes a very important skill. And I think my worry about our society is that we've developed a system that filters out the extremes. Oh, you're too much of a big picture thinker. Oh, you're too fine detail thinking. What we want is more and more homogeneity, more and more people that look like this. That means those people are taken out of organizations. And actually, the reverse is important. Like our conversation, what you need is diverse communities, different neurological preferences, but find a way of working together to resolve complex issues. So the two takeaways from me would be, one, recognize the more times you do it, the better you get, and be more conscious about doing that. It's not an accident, make it deliberate. And the other one is to recognize that neurodiversity, neurodivergent groups run well collaborating well will produce better outcomes.
I think it would be great to have another conversation with you around this topic and to unpack more. There's more questions I have, but I'll try to keep on track because I know I've already taken up a lot of your time this evening, your morning. But it would be great to talk further about like entrepreneurship and in the research space.
Yeah. And I think another conversation which would follow on from that is we call it entrepreneurship, but we could call it other things. We could call it a growth mindset. We could call it an orientation towards innovation. So in some environments, the word entrepreneurship is a bit hostile. In other environments, there are other words we could use. So this mindset, we call entrepreneurial mindset, you could call a growth mindset or a tendency towards innovation. And I think, again, language is so important to us as dyslexic. We shouldn't be fearful of the fact that we can repackage this type of thinking in a way that helps all organizations to benefit. So whether you're running a hospital, a university, a company, it doesn't matter. This mindset can be really valuable.
Well, I think that's a great topic, growth mindset, and we should bring Sally along, my business partner, because she loves these types of conversations. She's all about whole brain thinking and diversity of thought, and she's introduced me to lots of concepts that I am learning about. So I think it'd be a wonderful opportunity for us to have a bit of a roundtable conversation around growth mindset.
I look forward to it.
Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show and for sharing all your wisdom and thoughts around entrepreneurship and dyslexics in this space. And I look forward to talking to you again. So thanks so much, Nigel. Have a great day.
Thanks you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm Dr. Shay Wissell, and you have been listening to the Hobo CEO podcast. Head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au to find out more about today's guest speaker. To keep up to date with all of our news, follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And if you haven't done so yet, go to your favourite podcast platform, subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Join me next time for another conversation on the Hobo CEO.